Well, ladies and gentlemen, today is a thrill because I'm finally getting to talk to somebody I've wanted to speak to for some time. Matthew Smith is the co-founder and CEO of Really Good Emails. Matthew has a design background and something that he said in one of his live talks that I thought that's exactly what I want to hear. He said, "Ask me anything about anything." What could be better? Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, man. I'm really happy to be here and connect with you and hopefully be helpful to some folks in the audience.
So, something that is on everybody's mind these days, everybody in this community of email folks or email geeks, designers, developers, everybody is thinking about community in the face of AI,
Mhm.
which is coming at us. What do you think is coming?
It's an interesting time. Um, I've been reflecting on, other moments in history where maybe there was this kind of cataclysmic shift. I don't know that it can be mapped back in the same way because we didn't have the speed of things, but I've been thinking a little bit about the advent of photography and how photography, especially once it became more and more accessible, really changed the way that people thought about painting and capturing someone's image or likeness, in a painting and things like that. Obviously, this is much different. It's faster, um, and I think it's very disorienting. I think a lot of us are diving right in, and maybe our nervous systems are a little bit more amped up and like, okay, I've got to figure this out. This is exciting. This is nerve wracking. This is terrifying, but like, here we go. And then I've noticed other people from the sidelines sort of, no, thanks. I'm not interested. I'm staying back. This feels like hype, stuff like that. Um, but I think the amount of change that we've seen in, really just 4 months since the strong release of ChatGPT and what OpenAI is doing, and then Bing and Google, and then Meta, and, Apple's on its way, and others. So it's very, it's exciting, but it's also, really challenging. My instinct is that I love history. I love thinking about history. I love psychology. I love thinking about people. I tend to think that we're so inundated with so much information and misinformation or muddy information or um, in some cases even disinformation, meaning like specifically targeted to be wrong information, that I think that we're looking for, more reality, more like checking in with each other, more connection, to sort of balance out, that experience. Um, all throughout my life, I've been very community oriented. My own background, I had a difficult childhood, and that sort of set me up for the way that it worked for me. It doesn't for everybody, but is I began to strategize connecting with people as a way to soothe that part of my nervous system. And then I found that I could bring many people together. We could have a group, we could create friend sets and things like that. And you can see it in really good emails. We just loved to be this kind of um, gatherer of people and celebrating the industry and creating a community of people that, in our events, we just wanted to like all get together and appreciate each other and celebrate each other. And really good emails wanted to be like the Yoda in the story, not the Skywalker family. We wanted, our audience to be the Skywalkers, the Leias, the Lukes, the Rays, and really just push on that part of the idea that um, they get to have their story and they get to celebrate, and that we create these communities. I tend to think that um, the email geeks community is really unique. I think that it has a lot to do with how hard the problem is. It's a really steep learning curve to learn, how to do email really well. And it's not just the technology, which is very difficult, convoluted. We're still working in freaking tables and things like that, but also the number of different platforms, how you use those platforms, personalization, deliverability. There's so much, and it can be really complicated. And so we lean on each other. We want to learn from each other, you know. And the closest thing I've experienced to that is like the web that was right at the beginning. So, um, Web 1.0 is, the most static websites you can imagine, HTML only, everything inline, all that stuff. But once we started, separating out the JavaScript and CSS layers, and started, the folks like myself, we started working on Web 2.0, in the early 2000s, late 90s. And that was an exciting time. And because you could view source, right click, see everything, there was this real camaraderie. Like, what are you doing? How are you solving this problem? What's, how do we go after this? And we would learn from each other at events. We would learn from each other, using um, forums. There were PHP BB forums that were everywhere, and we were all learning on those things. And man, it was an exciting time. And I think Email Geeks has that. It has that quality of like a real camaraderie, a sense of belonging. And my own hypothesis is that places like Twitter, TikTok, etc., they'll still have their momentum, but I think more and more people will end up seeking out alternative groups that are much more niche. And the challenging side of that would be clicky, and maybe you'd get groupthink in some of these little communities. But the positive side is you find more honest, earnest, authentic connection. Um, and at the end of the day, I I'm not real bullish on emails being like some kind of catch-all solvent for all of humanity's problems. I'm more interested in relationship, and I'm interested in human wellness and growth. But I do think that email is an interesting tool to actually work on that material, even between consumer and brand. So the idea, I've often said, email is relationship delivered.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of you have this opportunity to create connection between you and your audience. And that if that audience, if you treat that audience respectfully, if you listen to them empathetically, and a lot of people either, I think, take empathy and make it something very soft and mushy, or they reject empathy. This is bullshit. Like, it's too, it doesn't mean anything. And I think there's this middle way that people forget. It's just being quite human, and it's just asking questions, and trying to understand, being an active listener. What is your, audience experiencing? And if you understand that well and thoughtfully, it's actually very, very good for business, and it can accelerate what you're doing because you're meeting needs with more articulation, more texture. So I think email is an interesting space for us to be able to do that. And yeah, that's how I think about all these things. I'm curious, what do you think is happening out there in the community space, and how are people thinking about AI?
Well, I mean, it runs the gamut from people being fascinated by it, and then, somebody personally reaching out to me saying, "Oh my gosh, am I going to lose my job?" Which somebody actually told me, and I think, hey, that's a legitimate concern. You don't know, we never know what's coming. But
Yeah.
I do see people seeking out more uh, connection and real, a real human to human interaction. And there's a way to do that with email. I know we can.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's an interesting thing happening here, and that if your listeners are interested, I strongly recommend reading Yuval Noah Harari. I'm mispronouncing. If you're if you're of the Hebrew tradition or Israeli, your language would, and your pronunciation would be much better than mine. But Harari has some fantastic, really interesting writing around kind of the origins of humans. And then now, as we move into the biological and technological revolutions and this AI revolution, how does it affect humanity? Where are we going? What are some speculative, interesting, likely outcomes? And one of the things he talks about a lot, I've read *Sapiens* and *21 Lessons for the 21st Century*, and in both he talks about humanity needing to really grow to be as adaptive as possible. The people who will survive this time and potentially thrive will be those who can adapt. And sadly, many, because of the way our society is structured, many people have not, developed that technique. And so, anything that we can do to aid our fellow human being in growing and adaptation, I think will be, something that we can do to maintain that community. I'm very interested in the idea that we could actually, there are groups that can do this. I don't think this is me. I'm not ready to start an AI company, but I have thought that it's within the purview of a company like OpenAI to actually develop tooling or direction for the AI to support those who might be less adaptive or those within certain economic spectrums, to give them greater tooling to be able to be more effective at their jobs, not lose their jobs. Now, that said, I was talking to a friend this last week who runs a large code school, and he's having to lay off, something like 60 people in the next month because AI can do their jobs so much more effectively. They're developers. And so it's not that you can just replace developers in total, but now one senior developer can do what 10 could do previously, right? So there will be huge shifts, and the podcasts I've listened to have suggested that the kind of tectonic quality of these shifts will be such that it could really cause some real distress. So I think as somebody who cares about community, I'm really concerned about that, and then I'm looking out for ways to support my community or other communities, disadvantaged communities, marginalized communities, to be more prepared. So if anybody knows about some of the things like that going on, I'm really curious and would love a DM. I'm at Whale on Twitter, and they're wide open. I love to have these conversations.
Okay, at Whale. Something I want to go back to something you said, and I've heard you say this a couple times, that email is relationship. How did you come upon that realization?
For me, it's communication is such a central part of relationship, right? So, when I come home, and I say I don't work outside of the home, so I really should say when I'm done with work, I check in with my girlfriend Akko, and I'm looking at her, I'm observing what she's doing, and I'm asking her questions, and I can tell pretty quickly if she wants to have a lot of conversation, if she's available to share with me how her day went, or if she's sort of shut down and it's been a tough day, or whatever. And I know whether from that indication, if there's an opportunity to ask more, or if she requires some silence and just appreciation, or if me sitting with her and just being present with her is what she needs. And we develop this skillfulness in relationship. Well, the challenge is that with email, we actually have some kind of engagement, between our audience and a company. We have some core expectations. This individual signed up for our emails for some reason, right? Unless we bought an email list and they didn't, sign up. But we in the email space, I started to recognize so often that the emails that get sent are quite narcissistic, and narcissism gets a bad rap in and people think, oh, that person is a narcissist, that person is a narcissist. You hear stuff like that. We all have narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
It's, it's part of our genetic makeup. It's part of self-protection, and it's on a range. Some people have a lot more narcissistic tendencies than others. Um, and so I was noticing though that the language in a lot of emails is always me, us. Here's this thing. And that just felt gross to me, and I had learned in my own life a lot about relationship. And, I'm coming up on 7 years sober. I've done a lot of internal work. I've done a lot of meditation and mindfulness and yoga. And I've spent a lot of time in this thing trying to sort through like what kind of life do I want to live that is, more supportive, more positive impact, and can be, a force for good in this world. And relationship just keeps coming up, friendships, uh, core intimate relationships, family, colleagues, all these things, and audience. And so it made sense to me to just start helping, for instance, the really good emails audience understand, from my perspective, we're in a really unique role for the brand that we represent, whether it's our own or a company we work at, to actually be the face of that relationship. And we can either be distracted and kind of poisonous, or we can be attentive and present and aware and connected. And then we have tooling that we can use to make that more relational, right? We have personalization. We can segment people into different groups. If we do that segmenting with wisdom or care or through surveys or other things, then that can get more and more dialed in, more effective, more appropriate. And, a good example is my friend Jorge was running an email campaign for Reverb, which is like they sell used music tools, use instruments, things like that, and technology. And they had one newsletter for a long time that would just go out to everybody, almost like the pamphlet you would get in your Sunday newspaper growing up. Here are all the ads, for everything. We're trying to throw the entire, catalog of coupons at you, seeing what will stick. And what they did instead was they started to segment people based on their buying behavior and searching behavior. And then if I'm interested in drumming, they're just starting to show me more drum oriented things. And then the arena of things that are peripheral to drums. And then they might have a link. Go see everything that's on sale at the bottom of the email. But the emails themselves were much more segmented to specific audiences. They saw sales skyrocket from that. Why? Because you're no longer shouting everything to those individuals. Now, that's not quite the same as me noticing that my girlfriend doesn't want to have a conversation right now, but it's leaning in that direction. You're just being more thoughtful, more appropriate. And then you can take it further, by either following up with the individual audience and learning more about them, learning what makes them tick. Or you can just get, thoughtful and crafty and notice things about their buying behavior and then create triggers that, um, you know, kind of connect to them as an individual. Maybe you are asking them questions, maybe you are offering them an offer. Um, but I think the opportunity is to figure out ways to use automation so that you can scale a tool like this, but also just be thoughtful. Or another good example is for Mother's Day or something like that, just asking people if they'd like to mute that. A lot of people have difficult mother father experiences, right?
Right.
Or an example might be, during some of the Black Lives Matter stuff, we turned off, some of our weekly emails and just had it. We sent a letter to everybody saying, "Hey, we're really sad. We're really sad about this, and we stand with, our BIPOC friends, and we really want to see justice and we want to see restoration and we believe in love. And that was a pause from our normal, like, here's all these goofy things that really good email says. And instead we were not tone deaf, we were well toned, right? We thought about that. And that really connects with people. That's relational. So this is how I think about these. And what's interesting is we all know this stuff. If you get out of your marketing head and just get into your relationship head, like, how would I treat my mother if she were my customer? Would I send different things? Probably. So
Right.
maybe start thinking about how you would send a relative. What kind of information would you want from them to know what you should send them? Those kinds of things. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping in addition to that kind of personalization and, thinking about individuals like, hey, this is to all of you, listen to my pronouncement. What are some other ways that people can have a better opportunity for click through or engagement with their emails?
Hmm. I think one of the key things is just really looking at your brand and your design. Um, my instinct is that most people try and do too much in their emails so they say, okay, I've got to make my emails look good or, be something. If you have a small team, if you don't have the capabilities to really, know what you're doing with design, find a really simple template and just masterfully go after that. A black and white template with black and white imagery and great iconography that's black and white and really simply done, that's got nice big text and it just reads really clearly. If your language is really strong, that's going to nail it all day long. And so this is where you hear people arguing for text-based emails. There's a reason for that. If your design is not enhancing and making it easier for a person to read your content, scan it, and understand what to do, then it's failing. If your design is in any way like too much and it's actually weighing down your email, then your deliverability goes down. So if literally the amount of design elements, imagery, other things makes your HTML, large kilobyte size, then that's going to detract from people being able to take action. And if your design, especially in that first part, sort of above the fold, is not creating intrigue, curiosity, or a sense of trustworthiness to create a hook to drive people down into the rest of the email, then you're failing, and there are known, well-established methodologies to improve that stuff. And it just takes time to go research it, go use ChatGPT to learn more about it, whatever you need. But I think that's one of the things that I think, I'll say this, that the emails that we often reject at Really Good Emails, I very rarely have seen an email that had too little that I rejected. It's almost always too much. And, usually it's the kind of thing where if somebody would just trim down and really focus, I think they'd find that doing less better is much more effective.
So you would say that in general, less is more when it comes to design.
Absolutely. Now, figuring out what to trim is hard,
Right.
right? So doing less better is hard work, right? Maybe you heard, I think, was it Hemingway or Wadsworth or one of these, old writers that said, I'm so sorry, I would have made this shorter, but I didn't have the time, right? He was writing a letter
Yeah.
to a friend or something like that. And, that really resonates for me, right? Is the editing process is really challenging. The thing that I like to do is play design golf, and I'm not actually a golfer, so it's kind of a funny thing for me to use a sports metaphor, but basically in every design you have to ask yourself, um, is this little point of difference, this change, this different thing, is it worth an extra point? Is it doing a job? So if you have 4 or 5 types of typography And that includes sizes and colors, right? So you might be using all Helvetica, but if you have, a large heading and it's black, bold Helvetica, that's 1 point. And then you have body copy that's, 12 or 14 point, regular, that's 2 points. If you have then, a Georgia script, or, some other, font, that's 3. If you have a line that, moves across the page and divides something, that's a point, right? You add all these points up and then you ask yourself, are all these points doing a job? So do I need that line there? Is that actually serving the need of the customer? Is this image adding a lot of value? If it's not, remove it, right? Like trim down to the basic MVP, or MVE, minimum viable email, and see what you need to add to really enhance it. Otherwise, text can do the job, right?
Very interesting stuff. I think that that's going to be very helpful to a lot of people out there. Has the reason
Fantastic.
behind really good emails, has it changed at all?
Hmm. It's a great question. Probably, I would say, in some ways, no, in some ways, yes. So I started really good emails because I had been a creative director, chief creative officer on a couple different, startups, and had noticed that I was always looking, where are the great, welcome emails? Where are the great, transactional emails? Where are the great receipts, or e-commerce emails, etc. And it was wading through a huge ocean. And this is years ago now, almost 10 years ago, that I started really good emails. And so, the amount of information out there now is so much more, but it's too much, right? We need curation. And so, but starting it then, I knew that there wasn't anything out there like that. And I knew that there was a little business opportunity that I could just spin up a WordPress, site and get something going and get MailChimp to sponsor it. And that was great. It worked. And then, fast forwarding, today we have a community. Our newsletter is like 220,000 people now. No, sorry. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. Holy shit. I was going to say 120,000, but I think it's eclipsed 200. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was so wild to hear that I was like second guessing myself, but it's grown so significantly over the last 2 years. Um, and what we've learned is that we're now at the epicenter of really helping people think through like what is the best in class for email. And we're still doing this on the side. I don't know if most people don't know that. Like I run a full-time design agency. Really good emails is still a side project. And as a team, we take home $500 a month each. So that's $6,000 a year to run really good emails. It's like a full product. And we're talking about 4 people. And so we just keep putting money back into the product, and we've been trying to build, an application and doing all these things. I think the exciting thing is that we've just found ourselves to be in a really privileged, special space where we can champion this community and help this community become its fullest self. So when I started that, I just thought it was a service. And, here later now, I can see that it's got huge opportunity to really be the center of a community. And so more events, more opportunity to really celebrate everybody out there, more opportunity to create resources. That's where really good emails is heading.
Well, I know it means a lot to people, and I've heard firsthand from people who, they would say things like, "I got in. I'm in really good emails this week. It's me."
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
cutting, cutting out a something from the newspaper. This is the new for the email folks.
Mhm.
What's a small change that people who use email could make that would result in a big change?
Mm. It's a good question. Um, Sort of leaning back to what I said before, I really think looking for what you can cut out rather than add in. And then, really understanding your core positioning. So if you understand your customers well enough, then your content will reflect that, right? So I'm trying to think of a good example, but the reverb example is not a bad one. Again, is okay. It turns out that Matthew doesn't want information about guitars. It's information about drums. So let's send him that information. Or getting to know the language that lands well with your customers, spending time with them, giving them a gift card or something like that to sit down for a 30-minute call and just ask them, hey, can we go through 3 emails and you just tell me, like, how did these land for you? How did they feel? What did you think about them? Get that, qualitative information, and especially from, 5 to 7 different types of audience. See what you can learn so that you can dial in your email, more effectively. So, that can all be done in a week. You could do 5 interviews, set them up, just really start to understand your audience a lot better, and then just try changing some language. My designer friends would kill me for saying this, but again, great design should be an enhancement to the copy. The content is what email is all about. It is not design. Now, if you're a fashion brand and you've really got to show off your clothing, then okay, case in point, something like, trying to think of a brand that would be a good example, but like a shoe brand like Nike, or I'm trying to think, Everlane is a good example. They want to show off their materials, right? But and you couldn't have a text email very effectively with Everlane. But other than the photography, their ability to really communicate clearly and make sure that they're addressing their audience in a meaningful way. If Everlane suddenly started selling like fancy watches, what? This doesn't make any sense. This is not what this company is about. They're about sustainability, core like clothing materials, not the extra stuff. That's why I like them. And so you've got to understand your audience and then dial into the right content. So again, for me, it's about trimming, not adding.
Hmm. Could you recommend a book or a couple books maybe for someone out there who wants to learn more about design, that maybe they could apply to email?
Absolutely. So my recommendation would be to really look into web typography, and there are several books in the grouping called A Book Apart, and that group, anything in their swath of reading is going to be fantastic. There's my friend Aaron Walter has written a book called Designing with Emotion, or Designing for Emotion. Within that A Book Apart series, he actually featured some of my work in that book, and it's great. It's a great book. In addition, I love a book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It's a really wonderful, that he uses the comic book style as a way to teach visual language. And it's a fantastic foray into just understanding visual language better. And then honestly, I think anybody that could take a design course, there's some great online courses these days to be able just to understand some of that material and dive into YouTube, just to understand hierarchy and layout and things like that. That's going to be a huge benefit. But those are my favorite books for on that topic. Another one in terms of brand that I think is really interesting, anything by Marty Neumeier. So Zag is one of those, or The Brand Gap is great. I think those both are fantastic. And then in terms of content, I highly recommend my friend Clay Hebert. You can look him up on Twitter. He really understands content very well, and writes a lot about it. And just really dialing in your understanding of AI, and thinking about how to use AI in your writing as a drafting or sketching tool that then you edit on. I think that you can make some huge improvements on your content just by leveraging some of that. So
Before we go, as we close here, this is not meant as a sappy thing. It's really, what encouragement could you give to someone out there who is in this email space?
Hmm. Um, that's a great question. I would encourage them that they have much more agency and capability than they probably realize, and to go with their instincts and to follow, what they've learned as they're learning more, and to work with their management teams and others. But if they drive toward relationship, if they drive toward their instincts in that space, they can often do really effective things. And that if they're feeling overwhelmed trying to do too much, one of the things I've learned as a sober person is just do the next right thing.
Hmm.
Right? Just take off that next small little piece and do that next thing well, you know? And then, okay, thank you. You can Marie Kondo that and thank it, send it, and then you do the next right thing, right? And that methodology has really served me well because it's easy to get overwhelmed these days. There's so much to learn, so much to do, so much to think about. But if you just really focus on that next right thing, it's a good place to be.
I love that. The next small thing. It really, it's a great thing when you don't know what to do. Just like look at the thing. Okay, I know I need to do this. Very good.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Matthew Lloyd Smith, it's a great pleasure. I'm very honored, and it's good to see you.
Good to see you, man. Appreciate you, and thank you for having me on the show here.
Our pleasure. All right, sir. Until next time.
Wonderful.